This is the episode that we all saw coming. We all saw the promos. We all were really excited about the prospect of a Flashpoint style storyline making its way into The Flash, and I think they did a really good job of this episode. In fact, I thought it was pretty exceptional and it was up there as one of the best episodes of the season. This one pretty much smashed it. So let's get straight to it. We start out with a still very powerless Barry, and he's managing to fool some criminals into thinking that the Flash still exists. That's not the case. It's still a hologram, and Barry at this point is still very much in the belief that he can do this without his powers. He goes to see his dad. There was a very interesting conversation where Barry and his dad Henry talk about Jay, and he says Garrick, and his dad says Garrick, and his dad says, "That's my mother's maiden name." That's probably going to be incredibly important. Nobody puts narrative like that in there for no reason. So his dad and Barry return back to the city, and his dad decides that he's going to stick around with Barry and just to be around. Wells is still very much insistent that Barry gets his powers back, and Barry is very much resistant to the idea. But then we have a new villain from Earth 2 coming in. His name was Rupture. He turned out to be Cisco's brother's doppelganger, and he poses a threat to the city that again puts Barry in the dilemma of whether he should get his powers back. Again, he's very insistent that he shouldn't. He can do this without that. Then we get to a point where Zoom comes into the picture and makes everything 10 times more difficult for Barry. In fact, he does a huge kind of massacre in the CCPD by killing off a bunch of police officers, taking the camera and doing this kind of periscope vlog thing for the rest of the city, and does an incredible speech about how hope is lost, there is no Flash, the Flash doesn't exist, this is all fake, it's a hologram, no one can save you now, that's it. I am the guy in control and no one can beat me. And that puts Barry in a very precarious situation, to the point where he finally decides that he's going to go ahead with the particle accelerator recreation explosion, and then we all know what happened. They recreate it and he essentially disintegrates or vaporizes and is believed to be dead. And that was the entire summary of the episode. Right now we are going to get right deep into the episode, and we're going to look at some of the notable moments of the episode, and there were quite a few. In fact, in one of those notable moments we do get an Easter egg which has a really good play towards the very end of the episode with what happens with Wally and Jesse. So let's get right into that. We're going to talk specifically here about Joe and Wally. There was a conversation that they had early on in the episode where Joe says something about speed and helping people, because Wally's been talking about how maybe in cars isn't really his thing. And Joe, his dad, says to him, well, I'm sure you'll find a way to have speed and helping people link up in your life to a point where you can do something with that. And this, in my opinion, was a great Easter egg that led to what happened to him in the end when he does get caught up in the particle accelerator explosion. This was really well connected, but the thing about the Flash is they tend to do this very well. So that was a really great notable moment that we know is going to have a part to play in a future episode. It's very important when Rupture does come into the picture. He's not only the start of the idea of Zoom bringing in henchmen from another Earth, from Earth 2, but you're bringing this guy in as an added threat. He does essentially become a vehicle that steers Barry towards that decision because of his link to Zoom and because of what that ultimately implies for added threats in the city. And there is the idea that there will be more, and not just more, but that Zoom is a kind of villain that cannot be beaten without the Flash. No one else can do this but the Flash. And I hear that a lot of people do say that the Flash is one of those shows that tends to have this flash in the pan kind of villain that appears in every single episode. There's always just one villain that walks in and walks out, and there's nothing consistent. There's always a villain of the week, And you could confuse Rupture with that villain of the week, but he did have a very important role to play in the episode, so I wouldn't actually resign him to that kind of disposable villain. And I didn't actually think that Rupture was a great loss, in that you're not someone who's going to be invested you're not someone who's going to be invested in Rupture's survival, because he is not a character that is recurrent. So when he died, the impact wasn't really felt, but the only reason why that was felt was because he was Cisco's brother's doppelganger, and seeing him die for Cisco was like seeing his brother die, which did have a great link to what happens between him and his brother when he hugs his brother, and that was actually a really beautiful moment, very tender, very sweet, and I think it was something that really added kind of development to the arc that goes with Cisco and his relationship to his family, and I'm glad that they brought that into this episode for him and gave him more of not just being that jokey guy, but someone who does have some emotional depth. Another notable moment is the realization that Iris comes to about her feelings for Barry. She does confess them to him. It's interesting that Barry doesn't actually respond, even though this is something that he has been feeling and he has expressed that he has felt for her. And I thought it was really kind of cute when he said, "How come you didn't, when I said I had feelings for you," he just switched because he was going to say it and then he didn't say it, and I felt like that was quite cute. One of the big things about the episode was also, like I mentioned earlier, Barry's wrestling with his inner feelings in regards to getting his powers back. Not just the risk to him and his life, but the risk to the city, the risk to others who may also be affected by the particle accelerator. There is this inner conflict, and there was a moment where he did shift and where he got staunchly back behind his feelings, and then he felt as though he had absolutely no choice, because Zoom was one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat he has come across, and there doesn't seem to be any other alternative to beating him than to taking the risk and going ahead with the particle accelerator against your better judgment, against your fears, against your qualms. And he was really, really scared. There was the moment when he spoke and he had a tear stream down, and I really felt that. And I actually think that Grant Gustin is a really good actor. I know there's been a lot of talk about how he's not good enough for the movies, and people have had some things to say, but there have been so many moments in this show, and not just in this episode, but in this show, where Grant Gustin has expressed this deeper range to his acting chops, where he has actually expressed that he has quite a great depth to his acting chops, that he's got dramatic flair. Like, there are moments, we know this show is not a drama, but he does display evidence of the skill to do dramatic acting, and there are moments that have called for emotional depth, and he's managed to pull it off to the point where he's made me feel something. And one of the best scenes that I would say to relate to that was when he picked up the phone to his mum on Earth 2, and I really felt that as someone who has lost my mum and would love to be able to pick up the phone, and I could imagine how that must have felt for him. And I felt like, as someone who has been in a situation where they've lost someone, and to know what it would be like to pick up the phone and hear their voice again, everything that he did in that moment was just so spot on that I was able to say, this guy has it. So I don't really care what anyone says about him not being in the movie. I think he's totally capable, and yes, there are other issues with things like tone and things like characters and recasting and things. I understand that, but I think he's completely capable, and I don't think he'd be out of place. But that's just another story, and that's just my other next opinion. So I'm just gonna stay on track with this episode. We must talk about Caitlin and Zoom. We know still that Caitlin has an emotional effect on Zoom, and his decision making seems to take a bit of a stab whenever Caitlin comes into the picture. And one of the great things about this episode is that Zoom becomes vulnerable. There was a moment when Zoom displayed that he is emotionally vulnerable within, when he said to Caitlin, after she asked him, "Why do you still keep me alive?" and he said, I don't want to be alone anymore. Now this, for a villain, is actually really progressive. I'm not saying that I haven't seen any depth in villains, but for a villain who is as badass as he is, and he is a pretty badass villain, he's a beast. Like, every time he's on screen, he commands attention. I don't take my eyes off Zoom when he is on the screen. I think he is a fucking vision. I think he's amazing to look at. I think he's amazing to listen to. I know that Tony Todd is behind the voice. It's a bit of a Darth Vader situation going on here, but he is a great villain, and beneath all that badassery, he's quite a broken man and quite a lonely man, and you see that. And obviously he's affected. He may not live very long, essentially, and that plays on his mind, and I thought that revealing himself to be emotionally vulnerable was actually a really good way to round him out as a villain, and to really shape him as not just a bad guy, even though essentially he is. And he did express to Caitlin that he felt the only way they could be together properly is if she dug into herself and found her dark side, because that's the only way that they could be together in a way that is perfectly matched, where her dark side can meet his dark side and they can pretty much like rule the galaxy. So now we're going to go to the scene stealer of the episode. There are some contenders for scene stealer of the episode, but I think we all know what the ultimate scene stealer was, and it was definitely the particle accelerator explosion, Barry's decision to do it, and the whole scene involving Barry disintegrating and vaporizing before our eyes, where he is apparently dead. Now we obviously know he's not going to be dead. There's 3 more episodes to come. The way they ended it was pretty damn cruel, because I was just screaming at the screen like, why have you ended it, and when is the next episode, and why isn't it now? And that had a lot to do with my excitement with this whole episode. We all knew that was coming, but when the scene did come, it was incredibly well done. And one of the great things about it is it had a nod to Flashpoint, and anyone who has read the comic or watched the animated movie will know how amazing this storyline is. And just to have odes to Flashpoint, we saw it in a previous episode where Barry returned back from another timeline and gave Iris a video message from Thorn, and that was a bit of a nod to Flashpoint, and now we get another one. And I think including things like that makes this show even more exciting, and it's just brilliant. But the particle accelerator was the ultimate scene stealer of the episode. I am going to give a couple of honourable mentions to Rupture. When he first bursts into the episode, his entrance was really well done. The special effects on his scythe was fantastic. Everything about it was just really nice. I thought that was a great scene. And to Zoom busting into the police station and killing the officers, I felt that when all the police officers just fell to the ground and he just stood risen among them all, it reminded me very much of when Superman landed in Batman v Superman and all his soldiers just hit the ground and he was standing tall among them, this all-powerful being. And it was a very similar scene to me seeing Zoom in that way, and it really displayed his power and how powerful he really is, how much of a presence he has. I felt that in itself was really well envisioned as an image. It spoke volumes, and I really loved that scene. That to me was one of the best scene stealers and is a contender to the particle accelerator scene, but ultimately the particle accelerator scene stole the show. So that was my review of episode 20 of The Flash. I thought it was incredible. It was definitely, in my opinion, the best episode of the season so far. Up there with the Earth 2 episodes. No fillers. 2 thumbs up, and I will definitely be around for the next episode. I actually loved this episode so much I watched it twice. They did a really brilliant job with this episode. So many great elements, and I think I've spoken about everyone. If I've missed anyone, feel free to let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time for the next review.